So our second presentation this morning is entitled The Blaktuary View, presented by Rick Shaw. Now, Rick Shaw is a Gamma actuary from northern New South Wales. He's advised the IMF and the World Bank on social security reform in the Middle East and served as chief actuary of the Bermuda Monetary Authority during the subprime crisis. His current focus is combining Aboriginal and Western ways of valuing complex systems. So can you please join with me in welcoming Rick?
I speak today at the request of the Actuaries Institute, and I just want to acknowledge Elaine Grace's support of the work that I've been doing. I've been asked to speak mainly because as it stands at the moment, I'm unique in being the only public Aboriginal actuary. As David says, I'm a Gamilaroi man from along the river. It's a freshwater man. I also want to acknowledge Lisa's presentation, because we're talking about the same things, which is how can our profession contribute to the things that the world is facing at the moment. And I also say, I want to acknowledge it's an honour to be on stage with you, Miller, because I really love your work, mate. The main thing I want to do today is speak about the parallels between my profession and my culture. We are survivors of colonisation, and in Australia, few of the colonialists have expressed any interest in this oldest surviving culture on the planet beyond watching us dance and looking at our art. So today, I want to share stuff that I haven't shared before. And in my culture, knowledge is passed on orally. We speak in a circular way. It's not linear, often returning to the main theme. And I'm going to speak that way. I've not done this before. And some of what I'll speak to you wouldn't have heard before, because it's not shared that broadly outside Aboriginal groups. And I've been given permission by my elders to start sharing our culture. Now, my hope today is to make a beginning, to start a conversation. And also, can I get rid of the slides? No slides. The actuarial profession has played its part in the colonial project. One of the establishment stories as a profession is people coming together at Lloyd's coffee houses in the 1600s to talk about pooling risk and indemnifying merchant ships sailing to the New World. And the process of colonisation, industrialisation and capitalism have led to an enormous amount of wealth for the colonising countries, and actuaries have served a role managing and monitoring that wealth and associated risks. If I stand back, I say the raison d'etre of the actuarial profession is a balance of conflicting interests. And the concept of equitable distribution, fairness, as you will talk about, underlies actuarial statutory roles in insurance and pension schemes. We are well-trained professionals subject to strict standards and codes of conduct who act on behalf of society to achieve outcomes that balance conflicting interests. As an actuary, my ultimate client, it's always been society. This role, acting on behalf of society, the way we conduct it, is why the profession can be referred to as a custodian of the financial industry. And that role has parallels in Aboriginal culture, where we were brought up to be custodians of the land. So, in colonial times, the profession has served the interests of colonialism. We've taken responsibility for equitable distribution of wealth and risk, because that's been a required task for the last few hundred years. And over the last few decades, a lot of actuarial work in insurance and wealth sectors have been codified by statute. The tasks, the actuarial statutory roles remain, but the actuarial role is established and guided by sound regulatory structures. So, the profession strives for new fields, new challenges. What fields suit the actuarial skill of balancing conflicting interests? Looking at the topics presented at this conference gives some guidance. What stands out is an interest in responding to climate change and the power of automated decision-making, AI. So what is the actuarial role? in climate change and AI. First, I want to share some of my Barada sisters Megan Kelleher's writing on Indigenous governance. For Aboriginal people, law comes from the land, and our law sets out responsibility to self, community, country, and future existence. We are intimately connected to the land. A person's identity is embedded in the land and our social relations. Our spirituality is derived from connection to place. Each place has its sacred origins, its own sacred and dangerous places, its sources of light, and its sites of death. The land is a sacred entity, and it is our duty to care for country. Indigenous governance is relational. A web of complementary systems is established with the intention of managing how humans live with each other without killing each other, without ruining the environment or alienating ourselves from each other and the environment. It is an ethos that evidence shows ensures virility, strength and increase of life-sustaining systems. So Indigenous governance is interconnected, interdependent and intergeneration. Protocols pertain to you as an individual and how you relate to other people, places and entities, where you can and can't go, places that are sacred, where practices might be restrained or encouraged, and who you'll engage with in those practices with. It has been described as a system of fractal governance. And Indigenous governance is polycentric. There is no central group, no hierarchy, no one group that dominates other tribes. Indigenous governance relies on complementarity, where responsibilities and rights differ depending on one's relationship to the country. For example, whether you're on father-side country or mother-side country. Men may hold the responsibility to burn country, for example, but they require the permission of the men whose mother-side country they're on. And the women are responsible for organising the burning, and if the men do it incorrectly, then they will be accountable to the women who will punish them. It's not possible to fulfil one's obligations without the complementary cooperation of other kin, and this may extend across multiple regions. I've adopted this system of governance to the overview of automated systems, AI. So let's talk about some central features of AI. Algorithm ownership, responsibility for algorithms requires an understanding of the limitations of computable systems. The limitations are a consequence of Gödel's theorem and Turing's work. As Roger Penrose says, understanding is not computable. So computing processes follow logical paths, are strictly rational. Human actions are guided by rational thinking and emotions. It is a combination of thought and feeling that is most powerful, which can lead to an instinctive understanding of how things fit together, which is the Aboriginal approach. So the Indigenous approach to land is that it's not separate from who we are, and if cared for, is an infinitely bountiful gift. In the Indigenous approach, the ethics of an algorithmic system cannot be separated from the system itself. If we understand the use of algorithms as a national resource, then issues of exclusion, privilege and ethics are inherently addressed. This is ethics as code. Adopting an Indigenous mindset, ethics becomes the aim of your algorithmic system, not just an externally imposed restraint. Ethics, good outcomes, are in Western society enacted as a restraint on an instrumental aim, such as profit. That approach falls down in complex systems. By complex, I mean systems which are non-linear, have feedback loops, and are fractal in nature, and have what we call emergent properties, where the system needs to be considered as a whole rather than as the sum of its parts. So what I've developed is a process of actuarial certification that the process and outcomes of a firm or a government's automated decisions are consistent with corporate and social objectives. I, as an actuary, take ownership and responsibility, as we do, in our standard actuarial roles. So I have a custodial role to represent the interests of society and to balance the interests of the government or business applying the AI with the interests of the people who the AI operates on. I certify that algorithms will not have inadvertent consequences, and that certification applies over time, not just at the point of review. Just to clarify a couple of things, this is not assurance. Actuarial certification is an opinion. This approach is consistent with a fractal world of systems within systems. And the important point, the thing that Louise talks about in the climate space, as I will soon, is that we as the professionals act on behalf of society. I think the actuarial profession is missing a big opportunity if it focused solely on technical aptitude. In AI, there is a cultural divide. To ensure that algorithms do not have internal consequences, you need both technical nous and an embedding of ethical considerations in the coding itself. So rather than focus on our technical aptitude, I think what society needs now is someone to take responsibility, to carry out the custodial role, which is what we can do. And also, I just want to finish the AI section by saying what will not work in AI governments is detailed regulation. Innovation is happening too fast. What works on Monday will be obsolete by Wednesday. The Aboriginal approach to AI governance emphasises custodial ownership and each individual's duty of care. Law is internalised, not externally imposed. Actuarial certification has been criticised as subjective, not objective. That's not actually the case because we are all connected through the land. I do a lot of work on climate and sustainability. A large challenge in this area is working out how to value non-economic elements. A lot of policy is based on cost-benefit analysis. And similar challenges arise as some of the work we do where we're representing Indigenous groups in negotiations with government on resource companies on land and access to land. The standard economic cost-benefit analysis I think struggles to allow for non-financial items. It's an appropriate tool for an extractive project. It's a colonial mindset in cost-benefit analysis, where if we're just going to dig up stuff to sell regardless of the impacting environment. But cost-benefit analysis is going to have a lot of difficulty valuing those things we value as humans. And whilst the standard approach is straightforward, easy to explain and straightforward to do, the simplicity is going to give rise to gaps in valuation and in policy decisions and the drastic consequences because it does not consider those things we hold dear as humans. And one of the basic tragedies is it assumes that there's only those things which can be measured which have value. This approach is all right for simple systems where the future can be reliably predicted. That's not what the world is. As Louise talks about tipping points, they're coming. Let's do something about it. So the standard valuation approach is consistent with the belief system that the world can be understood rationally, and that there is an objective reality out there which can be measured. Now, Western philosophy has moved on from that perspective, but Western practice has not caught up with the findings of Western philosophy over the last 150 or so years. Indigenous approaches are consistent with the worldview reflected in modern physics. The Indigenous perspective is that a system can only be considered in its entirety. Indigenous Australians know that the environment, community and economies are complex systems. An Indigenous approach sees the system as an indivisible whole and recognises the real value of the systems is in the relationships between different components. There is in our valuing system, there is an allowance for complex and unpredictable, non-linear relationships between components. And Aboriginal metaphysics is fractal, in that we believe each part of a system contains the whole system. So as I say, if we apply simple, linear solutions to complex systems, it will work well for much of the time, but it will not be adequate in times of crisis. And Aboriginal Australians, my people, have survived and prospered in this land during at least 4 ice ages. We've developed practices which allow us to foresee and prepare for what others would call unpredictable black swan events. We also see the world as essentially unknowable. Don't believe your models. It can be known or felt by instinct. And this is, to me, quite similar to the concept of dark energy in modern physics. But actually that unknowability is a feature of complex systems itself, where nonlinear relationships and dependencies make predicting precarious. So my challenge to our profession is to be, let's be the profession that calls out greenwashing. We have, in our work, and I've worked with a number of Indigenous academics on this, what we do is we apply Western economic and actuarial modelling approaches to be consistent with Indigenous principles that I've just described. The approach was, I originally developed the approach for the purpose of natural accounting frameworks, where there's been much discussion about the limitations of conventional valuation methods for considering the intrinsic value of things. In the approach that we've developed, it's a really, you have a set of principles, you want a valuation approach consistent with those principles. There's a range of valuation methods that can be applied, from a combination of the standard cost-benefit analysis allied with some qualitative considerations to variance of the willingness to pay methods, and the full quantification, which I developed for natural capital accounting using a version of Bayesian inference models, which I used to do a lot of work when I was based in New York and Bermuda. I used to do a lot of pricing work using those approaches. Sometimes it's useful to assess the impact of various scenarios. So what we were able to build a digital twin of the system being modelled. But I think what's really central to our approaches is to gain an understanding from the local Aboriginal people of what is of value in an ecosystem and how each part relates to its other. Because our approach, Indigenous approaches, are evidence-based, founded on over 65,000 years of knowledge. And for us, as in modern physics, it's the relationships between objects that matter, and our valuation approach reflects that. So it's how I got taught as an actuary. You can't consider assumptions in isolation or separate from the methodology. And that is different from how accountants and economists tend to go about valuations. We're more akin to the engineers. And it's a deep difference of understanding. I'll give you an example. Western people see race as a process of defining and categorising people, whereas I see it as something that arranges people in relation to each other. So in Aboriginal culture, there is no separation between the observing mind and anything else. There is no external world to inhabit. All perspectives are thus valid and reasonable. There is no one way or meaning of life. And the parallels between modern physics and, say, Eastern belief systems have long been known, from Heisenberg through Kirchhoff, Capra and so on. What is not known by many, because few cared to look, is that Aboriginal metaphysics is also similar to modern physics. And what amazes me most about my culture is that we've brought the findings of quantum mechanics and relativity into our daily lives. We've developed practice that is not separate from our beliefs, and governance systems consistent with those beliefs that work. And just as a close, for the for the Australians and the non-Australians here, the Aboriginal people, we're emerging from the shock of the last 230 years. We've survived and we are prospering. Our sovereignty has never been ceded or extinguished, and it coexists with the sovereignty of the Crown. Aboriginal culture is continuous and thriving. Our cultures are reviving. Old ceremonies are being resurrected and revitalised. It's an exciting time to be a young Aboriginal guy. The powerful energy of the West is having consequences that are now reaching the West. We must acknowledge, as Louise says, the destructive impact that colonisation and globalisation have had, not only on First Nations people, but on the minds and values of the colonialists. And it is to the wise old cultures that we must turn to lead us to a sustainable future. As Einstein said, no problem can be solved from the same consciousness that created it. And as I have been given permission by my elders, as a people, we want to share the gift of culture. We want to show people how to live in this land. Aboriginal ways can provide systems, structures and solutions for resolving sustainability issues. Acknowledging and enabling the wisdom in Aboriginal culture can help all of us find our role in restoring complexity and connectedness to the dynamic systems that make up human reality to start the journey towards reclaiming our role as a custodial species. In Whitefella Jump Up, Jermaine Greer suggests that embracing Aboriginality is the only way Australia can fully imagine itself as a nation. Not how the Aboriginal question may be settled, but how a sense of being Aboriginal might save the soul of Australia. So that's finished. I'm a debtor to my profession, and I want to give back with a challenge. The actuarial profession can continue to represent the interests of colonisation or face into today's big issues and take the perspective of what's good for the land and its inhabitants. Who's up for it? Thank you.
Well, thank you, Rick, for that. I've got a few questions here. First of all, how can we, as a profession, promote the internalisation of laws and ethics that you mentioned, rather than them being external constraints?
I think it's a really good question, because I do see, I often ask actuaries, you know, we work, this profession, it works. Somehow it works. For me, I've worked in 25 different countries, you know. I'm not at Chris Dakin's level, but I'm getting there. And it's not our technical nous, it's not our business skills. For me, I think it's somehow, there's something in the actuarial culture that works. So for me, we as a profession have internalised the values that we want to our internalisation of values is our most important facet of being an actuary. So my problem is with the world, I see the world over the last, 2 or 3 decades as going more towards an assurance approach, a checklist approach. And I think we as a profession, and I do think that's an inevitable consequence of sort of enlightenment and rational thinking. I get it, I know where it comes from. But I think we as a profession, but it's not working. It's clearly not working. In AI or climate change, it's clearly not working, that approach. So we as a profession can show that our way, which to me does internalise law, offers a much more substantial alternative approach to looking after the interests of society.
So, following on from that, how can we go about bringing more Aboriginal and Indigenous voices around the world into the actual profession to better evolve the way we perform our custodial responsibilities?
First, you've got the main challenge. I've been talking to the Institute for a while about what's it mean to be an Australian actuary. Is it any different from being an actuary anywhere else? I mean, the one unique thing in Australia is Aboriginal culture, really, you know, plus rugby league. And I think we should. I'd like my profession, because through gritted teeth, I love this profession. I'd like my profession to take on the challenge of putting educational Aboriginal culture into our education system. That's what we as Aboriginal people are asking. We don't want, we're kind of through the whole acknowledgement stage and, you know, and oh look, don't they make beautiful art? We kind of, you know, not having a go at my artist mates, but but what we want to give the gift of culture. So I'd like my profession, which I think of as a bunch of introspective potential leaders, to step up, because as Louise says, this profession has a role. And that the way we do that whole thing of taking ownership of the outputs is something the world is begging for. So come and talk to me. I say I've written a number of articles, and I am, as it stands, the only public Aboriginal actuary. Probably not true, and you've got, for the Australians in the audience, try and wonder why someone would be Aboriginal and be ashamed and not come forward on that and ask me, because that's what I was like when I got into the profession, and the world is changing on that. You know, that's why I'm here now. I'm here because my firm asked me to advise it on Aboriginal stuff. So, first step for anyone is reach out to me and I'll put you in the right direction. For my profession, Elaine, you know there's always a challenge there.
Looking at some of the specifics, can Indigenous governance and approach to ethics help us to improve quality and outcomes in, for example, our care sector?
Yes, we did as part of the Royal Commission into Disability, and we're part of, we're engaged to look into Aboriginal, how our Aboriginal people are being looked after, disabled Aboriginal people are being looked after. So we did this great big work. It's there's different cultural elements. You know, we're a different culture. We tend to work more communally, and we're also, a lot of us live remote. And so we did this work. It was quite good work. You know, I'm claiming it. I didn't actually do most of it. But one of the interesting things that came out about it was that the Royal Commission people really liked it. They said, geez, there's a lot of good ideas in here that we can use for the rest of Australia. And that's the key, that's where we are as a culture now. I heard on the radio this morning, I've done a lot of work with out-of-home care kids, because, you know, over 50% of the kids in out-of-home care are taken from their homes in Australia are Aboriginal. And, you know, 5% of the population, over 50% of the kids. And some of those kids, yeah, we all, you know this, Stewie, like some of these kids, the cost of, I heard on the radio this morning, they put them up in, some of these kids are a bit difficult, they put them up in hotels are over $1 million a year. Well, that's just ridiculous. There's so many vested interests in our kids being, remaining dysfunctional type of thing. And our culture is based on what's good for not just what's good for our kids, but what's good for our kids 7 generations into the future. That's how we think, that's how we frame ourselves. There's absolutely the balancing of conflicting interests. Living well and looking after the land is something that we as a culture are looking to give back to the rest of Australians on.
Okay, and one last thing, another example. What is the role of actuaries in making sure that we drive AI for the good of all, not for personal or corporate profit?
The role of actuaries is that we can enable to do that by taking responsibility for the ownership. Ownership of the output. The large corporations they're so segmented. There's so many silos in them. No one owns the whole system. That's what I think actuaries can do. Yeah, I talk to a lot of CEOs and board members in financial institutions who are very nervous that they're getting, the people building their AI are not able to tell them why decisions are being made. And for me, as a member of society, that's inappropriate. And me as an actuary, I build algorithms. I will have a team of build algorithms, you know. And we give the reasons for any decision with with the decision. It's not appropriate to just say that's what the machine says. We turn the black box into a transparent box. So what we as a profession can do is just bring those, bring the law of your profession to your work, and do a job. One of the things I've had to realise is do a job that you're proud, that you can go home and try and make your kids proud of, you know.
Okay, well, again, thank you, Rick, for that. And
Yeah.